All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to MSDynamicsWorld.com's webcast series on CRM strategies. I'm Adam Berezin from MSDynamicsWorld.com. In today's session, Microsoft Dynamics CRM Release Management Best Practices Revisited will be presented by Ivan Kurtev, architect at Hitachi Solutions America. So as we get started, I just wanted to add that we welcome your questions and comments throughout the presentation. We recommend using the chat and Q&A blocks that you'll see on the right side of the screen, and our presenter will answer them at the end of the session. We will also be recording this session and will notify all of you when it becomes available on demand. So without further delay, please allow me to welcome Ivan Kurtev.
Thank you very much, Adam. I really appreciate the opportunity to revisit this topic that I certainly enjoy talking about. Today, we have a packed agenda. There's a lot of topics that I would like to cover. I would like to start with a quick primer on release management to set expectations on what we will be discussing today. Release management, at least from the perspective that we will take today, consists of two key sub-processes. Build, this is the creation of a deployment package from source control or from another type of source. And then deployment is the installation of these deployment packages in downstream environments. This is the fairly standard definition of release management. I am a proponent of using best practices from custom development as well as the Microsoft application lifecycle management methodologies and applying them to CRM development. So you'll see that theme throughout the presentation. The key difference between the build and deployment processes is who executes them. Build is typically executed by the development team, the people who develop the actual customizations or source code, and deployment is typically executed by people who have control of all target environments, your test, QA, production environments, and so on. So there's different actors with different skills and capabilities and access. The release management, build, and deployment processes consume the output of the development effort. As a result of that, very tight integration and communication between the development and your deployment or configuration management teams is essential for this process to be successful. Overall, release management covers a number of other topics or practices, including the planning of releases, change management, traceability of code to requirements, and these are also very critical aspects of successful release management. We're not going to cover those aspects today. There is an excellent presentation from CRM MVP Leon Tribe for MSDynamicsWorld.com that you can view the recording of that covers how you can address these aspects of release management using Microsoft Team Foundation Server, specifically again for CRM projects and implementations. Okay, let's now first talk about the build, the creation of deployment packages and how we do that for CRM specifically. Going away from the more generic definition to specifically CRM, what does a build for Microsoft Dynamics CRM consist of? It consists first and foremost of the creation of one or more CRM solution packages. The CRM platform allows us only to import customizations in target environments using a solution package. So that defines, our envelope, our framework. So there are two ways to create a CRM solution, right? One is to export it from an existing CRM organization where the solution has been previously created. Using one of several approaches, or you can pack the solution from an unpacked version using the solution packager. We will talk about that in a lot more detail. Now, it's also very important that as part of the build process to consider other activities such as collecting artifacts that are not solution aware. For example, data, and we'll talk about the different types of data that you may include in your release. So it's important to consider that, to prepare that data, to document what needs to be imported where and so on. Also any environment configuration changes. For example, let's say in your solution you have a dashboard that contains 7 elements, and typically the limit for dashboards is 6. So now, before you can import your solution, you need to make a configuration change in your target environment. That needs to be documented and clearly presented to your deployment or configuration management team as deployment instructions or a script that they need to run, one of those things. From a deployment perspective, we need to import the solution packages. We need to import any configuration data and other components that are not solution aware that we may have, and also to execute any one-time deployment steps. And these one-time deployment steps may be executed prior to the import of the solution package or packages, or after post-deployment steps. So this really where your deployment instructions or manual steps will come into play, and any opportunity to automate those steps will make for more smooth execution of your deployment. Okay, so as we talk about build and deployment for CRM, we have to talk about CRM solutions. They define, as I said, the structure of the output of the build process. On a high level, I think of CRM solutions as containing 2 types of components. One is custom code components. This activity DLLs, your web resources, JavaScript specifically web resources, and also of CRM metadata. And when I say CRM metadata, I mean the definitions of CRM entities, forms, views, charts, relationships, and so on, workflows, dashboards, templates, everything else that goes in the solution. That is not custom code. These components are exported or live within the solution within one large file, XML file, called customizations.xml. If you unpack a solution, you will inevitably see that file. That file tends to get very large very quickly as it contains all of these customization components, and that presents a lot of challenges for us that we'll talk about in a second. Now, I should also mention here that technically the only way to modify CRM or to create or modify CRM components is through the customization tools, right? So that is something that's important to understand. There's no other way for us to, let's say, create a CRM entity other than create a CRM organization. So what is the challenge that CRM metadata presents for us from a build and deployment perspective? First of all, there are very limited auditing or version control capabilities in the platform itself. Let's say you do a deployment and someone says, I see a new segmentation field that we've added to accounts. Oh, I'm not familiar with it. Who added it, and when did this happen? There's really no easy way for us to answer that question if we just look at the CRM platform or the solution. There is also no traceability of the changes to requirements, work items, defects, and so on. So let's say someone asks a question, why did we add this field to the form? What was the driver behind that? That is the type of information that needs to come through our release process. The other challenges with solutions and with CRM metadata is how do we manage concurrent or parallel development? We have hopefully successfully went live on CRM. We have a production environment. We are working on further enhancements that didn't make it in the initial release. Now we have to support both the production environment. There may be a bug or two that comes up that we need to fix probably sooner rather than later, but in parallel, we'd like to work on the next release. Then at some point, we need to put these changes together, right? We want to make sure that our second release includes all of the fixes that we have built so far. So supporting these efforts can become difficult with CRM solutions only. You cannot easily merge the two separate parallel development efforts. So there are different build options to address these challenges that you see out there. And on the session that we did last year, we looked primarily at the solution packager, we found out through our polls that a lot of customers, or at least attendees to our webinar, did not use the solution packager. So I looked and thought of other approaches that I've seen out there. I want to discuss them briefly as well. So the typical build options that we're going to discuss is using a gold build organization, the solution packager and source control build process. I have a small typo there, apologies for that, and also hybrid approaches. And we'll talk about these approaches in more detail. The gold build organization, what does this process look like? So we have a development effort, and then we want all finished customizations, we one way or another move to a gold build organization that includes our latest solution, latest changes, only completed changes that are ready to be released. And whenever we want to execute a build, our job is very easy. We simply export a solution from our gold build organization, and that can be a managed or an unmanaged solution, depending on what type of solution we use for our deployment. The challenge with the gold build organization approach is that is not on the build side, but before we execute a build. We need to have a very well-defined process of how we move customizations to the gold build organization. Support for parallel development, for example, is very limited. If one developer adds one field to the account form on one environment, on their development sandbox, another development adds another field on their sandbox. If you want to try to move those changes with even the smallest holding solution that just has the account entity to your gold build organization, these changes will contradict with each other. Probably whoever imported the form last will win. But that doesn't necessarily meet our needs. So that's something that you need to manage carefully. Also, support for parallel development efforts is problematic. Let's say if you do even attempt to do that with the gold build organization, you'll need one organization for each of your development branches. So you'll have a gold build organization for any bug fixes, another one for your next version of your solution. And then merging these customizations from the separate branches becomes difficult. It may require re-implementing some of the changes in your new development environment, and that creates some challenges for you. This approach works best if you have a small development team, let's say a couple of developers, not more than that. And also if you can implement a structure where one developer works on a given component. So one developer will be responsible for making changes to the account entity. Another developer will be responsible for making changes to the contact entity, and they will never work on the other components. So all of the changes to that particular customization component are going to come from one development environment into the gold build organization. That typically addresses some of the issues. But unfortunately, on larger teams, on more complex scenarios, it's hard to implement something like that. If you have an initial implementation, right, your very first implementation, parallel development scenarios don't apply. You only have one development effort going, and in that case, a gold build organization would probably work better for you. So if you're anywhere in that group, certainly that's simpler approach, and it may work for you. For more complex scenarios, what we see is typically that we execute the build and we manage a part of our release process is some form of source control. This process relies on the solution packager, and the output of the development effort is unpacked solution components which are checked into a source control system. I personally use TFS, so Microsoft Team Foundation server, so I may use source control and TFS interchangeably. Apologies for that. Then in your build process, what you do is you pack your solutions from the unpacked solution components with the solution packager. This then allows us, this type of approach allows us to leverage the capabilities of the source control tool for auditing and versioning of customization components, branching and merging. All of those types of capabilities become a whole lot easier. Also, because we're working on small, now when developers are checking things in TFS, they're checking in much smaller components. Their job becomes easier and concurrent development becomes easier, and I'll talk about that in a second. We wanted to take a quick poll first. Please let us know what method you use to build CRM solutions for deploying to your target environments. A gold build organization, a build from source control, or another, some kind of hybrid approach between the two. And we'll give you a little time to answer the questions in the poll. Okay, we have a lot of other content to cover. I'm assuming anybody who's willing to respond to our poll has done so already. Adam, can we see the results at this time, or do you want to give a little more time?
We can give a couple more seconds.
Okay.
Okay, we can end that poll. Ivan, can you see the results? Would you like me to read the results? I can see them.
I do not see the results.
Okay. All right. So 29% for gold build organization, 29% for build from source control, and 24% from other or hybrid.
Okay, that's certainly very interesting. So I'm glad I did cover this time the gold build organization approach. That's great. Okay, let's now move on to the next topic on our agenda, and this is on how we can use the solution packager in a typical build scenario. A quick information on the solution packager. It was released in August of 2012 with update rollup 10 for CRM 2011, and it's available for all newer versions of CRM 2011, past update rollup 10, 2013, and pretty soon 2015. The solution packager aims to resolve the challenges with CRM metadata that I described earlier. I've listed here in this presentation a couple of resources in the Microsoft CRM SDK that discusses the usage of the solution packager. Now, how does the solution packager help us address the challenges we discussed earlier? The solution packager, when you run it against a CRM solution, it identifies the individual components in the zip file and extracts them out to individual files. This is referred to as an extract operation. The individual files then can be checked into source control. Two developers can work on different components and check them in independently within the same solution without creating concurrency issues. Now, if they are working on the same component, they immediately, when they check in, see the changes. They can realize that someone else has made a change. They can potentially merge the changes using the source control tool, or just re-implement, refresh their environment, re-implement, however, that whatever is appropriate in the given scenario. Now, once we have and we've established our solution and checked it into source control, we can recreate the solution file from the individual extracted components by packing them. With the pack operation, certainly something that you can execute manually. Let's say you want to build your development solution in order to refresh your development sandbox. We can repack manually, but you can also invoke the solution packager from an automated build process, and we'll talk about automation later in our presentation in more detail. So in order for this to work, we need to be synchronized with our development process. Our developers need to use the solution packager all the time. So the impact on development is important to understand. So first, as I said, we manage an unpacked solution in source control. When a developer needs to make a change to a customization component, they will make a change in their development environment. Then they will export the solution, unpack it or extract it, and then check in the modified component or components into source control. There is a great opportunity for automation here. Both the export of the solution, the extract, and the source control compare operations can be scripted. So you run a quick script, and you see you're presented at the end with a dialog that shows you what files are different, and you can determine which files you need to check in. Now, some important points here. First of all, this adds a little bit of overhead because the developer now has an action after they've implemented the customization. Developers need to be socialized to this process. They need to understand the value of this process. You need to, one way or another, educate developers on what they need to check in after they make a change to, let's say they've added a field to an entity. What do they need to check into source control? Let's say they've added that field to a form. What individual files have changed? The solution packager will have one file that will contain all the fields for the entity, separate files for each form, separate files for views, and so on and so forth. So a developer needs to understand what is the output of the solution packager extract operation and what they need to check in. So that process needs to be a place. What I've recently done that certainly helps is to, as I mentioned earlier, automate the source control compare operation. With TFS, it's a fairly straightforward task to do something like that. Once you've unpacked the solution, you just pop up a compare window that shows you the differences between what you have unpacked and what exists in source control, so that you have to think less about what you need to check in, and the process just tells you these are the things that have changed, which of them do you want to check in. Another important point is that you cannot let your development environments, individual sandboxes, if that's what you use for development, to become stale. You have to continuously, as frequently as possible, refresh them from source control between every work item or development task that your developer goes through. They should probably try to refresh their environment in order to make sure that it is that they have as few differences as possible between their development environment and the source control environment. So when they're comparing changes and getting ready to check them in, they're not seeing a lot of noise because the development is no longer current, and other people have made changes to the system, and their development environment does not have them. Another key aspect of using the solution packager is the mapping file that you can provide, and you can pass to the solution packager with the map command argument. This XML file allows us to pack custom code components from a different location. So this is a great capability, and this refers to plugins, custom workflow assemblies, JavaScript web resources. Typically, we manage these components and develop them in separate Visual Studio solutions. Some of us like to use the CRM Developer Toolkit for that. Others do not, but in most cases that I have seen, we use some kind of a Visual Studio solution to develop these types of components. And we keep that solution typically in source control somewhere, in whatever source control system we prefer to use, hopefully TFS. So we do not want to check in these components from the Visual Studio solution that we developed them once and then check them in again with the unpacked CRM solution. Right? That creates double work for our developers. We certainly want to respect and value their time. So the mapping file will allows us to say, do not look for these custom components or whatever components they are in the current folder where the solution has been unpacked or stored, but look in another folder, and this would be the folder where your actual Visual Studio solution for this is. There are a number of wildcards and substitutions that you can use in the mapping file that allows you to point to the correct location where, let's say, your JavaScript web resource will be coming from, or your plugin DLL or your custom workflow activity DLL would be coming from. Now, in order for this to work, probably you want to get latest and build your plugin and custom workflow activity assemblies using something like MS Build prior to executing a pack operation. For JavaScript web resource, you just need to have the latest version. It's a little easier. But again, there's something that you can do in advance in order to get the latest version of your DLL and then merge it into the solution as you pack the solution. So that's very helpful. It eliminates the need, the mapping file eliminates the need for us to manage custom code components in two places in source control. Another aspect of using the solution packager is if you use managed solutions. I know that in a number of scenarios that I've seen in the past, only unmanaged solutions are used to deploy to downstream environments. I have recently started using more managed solutions. There are certainly benefits of using them, but if you do want to use managed solutions with this approach, there's a small wrinkle, and that is that you need to, when you export, before you unpack the solutions, you need to export both a unmanaged and managed version of the same solution. Then when you unpack once, and you specify that the package type should be both to the extract operation. That will show you very quickly that for the most part, managed and unmanaged solutions look the same, and the main areas where there are differences are form XML and the sitemap. You'll see that a separate for each of these components, an unmanaged and a managed file will be created from the solution, and they will have the same name, but the managed file will have _managed suffix added to the component name. That then will allow you, if you follow this approach, then when you pack, you can directly pack from this unpacked source a managed solution if that's what you're deploying to downstream environments. You also want to always keep and have the ability to pack an unmanaged solution to support future development, so you'll need to do both. Some pain points with the solution packager that I've experienced out there. The number one are shared files that are in a folder called Other, right? If you look at the typical structure of an exported solution, there's this there are folders for entities, security roles, option sets, custom assemblies, and so on and so forth. And then there's this folder called Other. So there's a lot of trouble with that folder. First of all, there's 4 files that are essentially one for the whole solution. So you tend to get the same problems there that you have with the single customizations XML file that we discussed earlier. For example, solution XML contains all the components that are in the solution. Well, what happens if 2 developers in on two different development environments create new entities? When they go to check in, they will check in a version of Solution XML that has their entity, but if the other developer just checked another version that has another entity that still doesn't exist anywhere else, the second check-in will override that entity. So what you see frequently happen is that if you're using this process, you tend to manually update solution.xml. Fortunately, the structure of solution.xml is fairly straightforward and easy to update. It's not a huge pain point, but it's something that frequently requires manual intervention, so it's a pain point. Similar scenarios exist with the sitemap, although much less frequently. Then there's relationships, XML, and entity maps. These 2 files, again, deal with relationships, and both of them, they contain progressively more information. Entity maps just contains the 2 entity names. Relationships XML contains the names of all the relationships. So they're again one file. So if 2 people add 2 developers add 2 relationships, even if they're to different entities, they have to update this one file. So again, managing that file carefully is a problem. One of the best solutions always is keeping environments in sync at all times and refreshing them frequently. Then for each individual, the relationships for each entity, there's a file in a folder called Other Relationships. There's one file per entity with all the relationships for that entity if you've added the entity to the solution. Then for one-to-many relationships, the relationship is stored in the file for the primary entity, so that's also important to understand. But it's fairly easy to work with these files. The challenge is with 4 files that are updated for all user and team-owned entities, and those are the business unit relationships, the team, user, and owner relationships. These 4 files, when you add a new entity, you always have updates to them if it's a user or team-owned entity, not an organization-owned entity. So you will have to manage those files and deal with concurrency issues. And finally, another pain point, or just something to be aware of, if you have a custom plugin assembly or a custom workflow activity assembly, there's a file that describes all the classes, let's say plugin classes if it's a plugin assembly, in the file. It's named assembly name.data.xml. And whenever you add a new class for a new plugin and you add the registration, you also need to remember to update this file, even though your actual plugin DLL you may pick up from elsewhere, right, from a Visual Studio solution when you compile it. If you forget to do that, you get the error that the plugin assembly does not include all required plugin types and your solution fails to import. So you just have to remember to update that file frequently as well, at least anytime you add a new plugin. These are some of the typical pain points that I have seen while working with the solution packager. They're certainly fairly easy to address, and the value in my mind of using the solution packager and the benefits far outweigh. But these are certainly limitations that still exist out there and you'll have to work through. Next question, do you use the solution packager to pack solutions from TFS during a build? And we'll give you a little time to answer that question.
Another couple of seconds and we'll close that poll. Okay. All right. 15% said yes. 47% said no.
Okay. Excellent. Hopefully that, yeah, now I can see the responses. Yeah,
oh, you can. Okay.
Yeah, I'm continuing to see fairly low adoption of this tool, and this is certainly very interesting for me. Hopefully the information we provide here helps because there are significant benefits. Now, I'm going to talk next about build and deployment automation and where we can use automation in this process and how. The first area is during development to help our developers check in their changes in source control. Before, as we discussed earlier, before you can check in your changes, you have to export the solution from your development environment and then unpack it. You also need to, you also may need to export unmanaged and managed solutions, versions of the same solution if you are using managed solutions. So here is an example that from the Microsoft CRM SDK of a code sample that you can use to very quickly create a command line utility that will export a given solution to you. Now, what this example does is, as you can see, it exports only unmanaged solution by default, so you may want to parameterize the managed property to tell your utility to import both managed and unmanaged, but it's fairly straightforward, fairly quick, and you can put together command line utility and then a script to combine it. You typically run the solution packager from the command line, so these are very easily can be combined in one script where you first export the solution and then run the solution packager against it. And finally, on top of that, you can use, in Visual Studio, there's a utility called tf.exe if you use TFS for source control to then automate the compare operation between your locally unpacked solution and what you have in TFS, so that your developer immediately sees these are the things that are different between my development environment and the latest version of the solution in source control, and then decide what needs to be checked. Again, this does add a little bit of overhead to the development effort. So any type of automation or streamlining that process for the developer increases their productivity and adds value, improves adoption. So this is in terms of build automation, I'm going to talk briefly how we can automate and what the build process would look like. First of all, we'll need to get latest on the solution from TFS. If you're using TFS, as I said, you can use tf.exe and very easily get latest. You can compile your custom code using MS Build, right? Your custom, your plugin solution project or custom workflow activity project, you can compile using MS Build. Now you'll have the DLLs ready to merge into the solution when you run the solution packager. Then you pack your CRM solutions using the solution packager. The map switch that I discussed earlier allows us to get our JavaScript web resources and custom assemblies from the Visual Studio solutions where we developed them. Again, automating this process and running it frequently allows us to catch any issues early. Let's say someone, for whatever reason, forgot to check in a specific piece and the solution pack operation does not successfully complete. You're going to be able to catch that. Another issue that you may encounter during a pack operation is when developers add new components or remove components from the solution. There's a parallel source control operation. Just because you add a new entity in your CRM environment doesn't mean you're done. You have to check that into TFS as well. Or you remove an entity or an attribute, you take something off of the form, you have to remember to check those changes into TFS, or source control, whatever you use. That's very important in this scenario. You typically do not even want to include system components that are not customizable in your solution. The solution packager skips them anyway. Another consideration during build, where some automation is possible, at the end of your build process, how do you increment the version of the solution to reflect that this is a new build and it has a different build version, the solution version you increment. You'd see that typically you can update that solution XML file that I spoke earlier. There's a place within that file for the version, or you can update the description. Each of these is possible during the build. Doing a small update to the solution XML file typically will not break your solution, either pack or import operations, provided that you make a legal change to the solution XML file. Now, a lot of these activities can also be executed using the TFS build engine, so you can have your builds be automated and run in TFS. Then you obviously don't need to get the latest TFS. The TFS build engine is very well tuned to compiling your custom code, so these are very straightforward things to do in the TFS build engine. Then you have to integrate the solution packager in the TFS build engine, and that is certainly possible. I have seen implementations where that is done with entirely custom work, custom TFS builds. There's also the CRM CI framework that's available out there that does that for you as well. So that's another tool. I've referenced it at the end. That certainly can help us with build automation as well. It's a very interesting tool with a lot of capabilities. Again, assuming that you're using Team Foundation Server. Now, from a deployment automation standpoint, until recently, a lot of times you'd see solutions were just imported manually using the solution import wizard. With CRM 2013 SP1, this recent release earlier this year, some very exciting new capabilities are coming online. There is a tool now called the CRM package deployer, which is included in the SDK, and it allows us to import packages into CRM 2013 instances. And you can execute that. The tool has a UI, or you can use PowerShell if you're automating your deployment to some degree. Now, when we say packages very interestingly and importantly consist not only of CRM solution files, but also data that's exported to flat files using the data migration tool, which is also part of the CRM 2013 SP1 SDK, and I'll talk about that more a little later. In addition to these capabilities within your packages, you can also include and automate other deployment steps. There's an extension or point before we import and after an import where you can add custom steps that you can connect to your target environment, and through the organization service make whatever configuration changes you may need to make. So that will allow you to any things that you now do manually and you have to properly document and make sure that someone checks that checkbox and completes that task now can be automated. You write that code in Visual Studio, something that hopefully everybody's familiar with, working with the organization service in custom code, and you can make those changes that way. It's certainly a great advance, something new, something that's available since last time I presented the session. Quickly, another poll: how do you import solutions into target environments today? Do you use the manual solution import through the wizard, any kind of scripted solution import? Do you use the CRM package deployer if you're on the latest version of CRM? Okay,
the results are in.
Results. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
It looks like a lot of times they're still using the manual solution import. That is due to the fact that there were, these capabilities for scripting solution imports were limited in past versions of the product. Hopefully, with the CRM package deployer, this changes. If you're using a manual approach and you're using CRM 2013 SP1, take a look at the CRM package deployer. Certainly, I strongly believe it will make your life easier. Now, let's talk a little bit about data. Frequently, just importing a CRM solution is not going to be enough for you. It's not going to produce a functioning environment. In order to do that, you're going to need to move some data into or configure one way or another some data into your target environment. So let's talk about data. There are several types of data that is very important for the functioning of your system. The first one is, if you will, out-of-the-box data related to the security model. By that, I refer to business units, teams, users, links between these records, also links between these users and teams and security roles and field security profiles. You will not have a fully functional environment until this is in place. So one way or another, this data needs to make it into your system. Typically, during a build, you want to, already during development, you want to manage that data in source control, put it in source control, and then during a build, get that data and make it available for deployment to be imported into your target environments. In order to do the import, either both the export and the import, you can now use the data migration utility, or you can use samples from the Deploying Microsoft Dynamics CRM to Target Environments white paper. It has samples. So with the package deployer, you can do some things above and beyond just the import of the entities, which the data migration utility would do for us. Very important piece here is to preserve consistent IDs for these records across environments. They may be referenced in processes, views, etc., and they will break if the IDs of, let's say, your business units or your teams change, or even users, if you reference them anywhere in processes. It will create manual deployment steps for you if you don't preserve consistent IDs. So it is well worth the initial investment to put this process in place. It will simplify anytime you do you import a solution in your environment. Next time you won't have to go and manually fix workflows. Another type of data is you see all kinds of names for it out there. I refer to it as configuration or master data. But what this is because you have custom CRM entities, they store what is configuration data, not true transactional data. One example, especially coming up with CRM 2013 SP1, is the Unified Service Desk, which heavily uses configuration data in custom entities. And to get that in target environment to work with Unified Service Desk, you have to move this data from one environment to the next. So it's a very important part of the process. Typically, the volume is very low. You won't see it more than 1,000 records in a custom configuration entity. But it's very important, again, to maintain this data in consistent format across your environments, and to ideally preserve the IDs, because frequently this is the type of data that you'll reference. In addition to data in the security model, you will probably be referencing this data somewhere in your workflows, dialogues, views, etc. So you also ideally want to manage this data in source control. The data migration utility will make that easier as most of you migrate to CRM 2013 SP1. For older versions, you can use custom tools, or you can invest in the ADX Studio LM toolkit. Certainly does an excellent job at managing these tasks for you. And finally, for any non-production environment, you will probably need sample data in order to execute your tests and so on and so forth. So this will be transactional records, let's say accounts, contacts, and so on and so forth. Typically, it will be fairly limited in volume, unless you, let's say, have to spend time building reports. Then you really need a lot of data to make sure that they were performing correctly and showing data correctly. But some sample data you're going to need. I'm a favorite of asking your designers to create sample data as well. One, to force them to think through what the data should really look like. You end up with better entity design. And then that data is immediately available. It gets imported in your development environments. It gets imported in your test environments, wherever you need it. It is the same data, and it's what your data should look like. You want to manage it in source control and import, export it, make it part of your build and your deployment efforts, both for your development environments and other environments. For sample data, consistent IDs are less important as long as the links between, let's say, accounts and contacts, opportunities and accounts, or opportunities and contacts is preserved. But there are other ways to manage that. I've seen sometimes sample data imported even with the import wizard. It tends to work well enough for that purpose. But it's another type of data that typically you need to manage. You're saving, again, your developers, for example, a lot of time They don't have to create that data manually every time they need to test something. Plus, you give them what you consider is more realistic data for their development and their testing. So it's certainly something we want to pay attention to. So very quick poll here. Is data included in your build and deployment process today? Okay, I see the results. Thank you, Adam. It doesn't look like a lot of you are using this capability, but hopefully with the data migration utility, you revisit those plans. As I said, there's plenty of opportunity for improvement if you do include data into your build and deployment processes. In the interest of time, I'm moving to the next topic, build verification. Right, once we finish deployment, how do we know that we have build that meets all of our standards? And before we even deploy, how do we know that we have a good build that is worthwhile deploying to a target environment? The first test is, does your custom code compile, right? Your plugins and custom workflow activities. Does it pass unit tests if you have unit tests for your plugins and custom workflow activities? The next step is your CRM solution metadata in source control correct, and does it pack when you try to pack it with a solution packager? Then the next milestone is, do your solutions import in a build integration environment? And that is something that should be on the last good release. The reasons the solution may not import is both because of inconsistent check-ins using the solution packager, but also, let's say you've deleted one field and you've re-added the field with the same name, but a different data type, the CRM solution import will fail. There are a number of scenarios similar to this one that I won't go into in the interest of time, but you still want to test before you go and deploy in one of your actual environments. I strongly recommend having a build integration environment, at least an organization on one of your development servers that is on the last good release, and you test the solution import. Until you've tested that, you still have the potential that an issue may occur when you try to deploy. And then finally, do we pass functional tests? And I'll talk about more tests a little later. They're functional tests, maybe you execute them manually or in automated fashion. The types of tests that I typically see out there are one are delta tests. This is new functionality. We just released a new feature or fixed a bug. We definitely want to focus and target and test that, and that typically will be a manual test. It's something new. Smoke tests is ideally that's an automated test that touches the key areas of the application that you know at a high level, you have a good solution. And then integration tests or your complete tests that test every possible scenario that your system should support. For something like that, especially integration tests, some kind of automation will drive how extensive your testing is, and the quality and the repeatability of your release process will greatly improve if you have some automation. I personally have not seen a lot of automation of testing, post-deployment testing out there. A lot of times this process is manual, and that tends to generate issues. But I'm certainly a proponent of a process that does implement some level of automation, either with Visual Studio Test Manager or other tools, if that's what if your organization has other tools. I will skip the poll here. We had a quick poll on this topic, but I'd like to skip it I just want to mention that in the end, I referenced a number of tools and resources, and I have summarized them here for you so you can go and take a look at each of them. And a number of links at the end of the presentation are also available, white papers, links to tools, and so on and so forth. I really want to take a look at some of the questions here in the last minute or so. See if we have anything. Looks like the only question we had was
yeah, somebody's asking if
yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ivan. Someone wants to know if they can get a copy of the session since we recorded it. Yes, we're going to notify everybody when it's been posted online, which should be in the next day or so.
And Adam,
and if you have
I didn't ask you. Can anyone who's logged in download the slides, or do they just get the recording?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you want the slides, you can email Ivan directly. But what we'll do is we'll just send you the link to view the recorded session.
Okay. Yes, you can reach out to me. Let me go back to the contact information. If anyone wants the slides and some of the links, please ping me either on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I can provide this information for you.
Yeah.
I'd be more than happy to provide the slide deck itself.
Yep. And yeah, the Q&A box on the right-hand side, don't be shy, don't be hesitate to type in your questions. Ivan's eager to answer them. So why don't we give people a minute or so to see if they have any questions.
Yes, let me see if I can just type it in here. I'm not sure if I responded. Maybe I responded to just my email address went to a specific question. Let me see how I can. Can I respond to everybody, Adam? Am I missing something here?
Yeah, it looks like your email. It looks like your email got sent.
Okay.
Yep. So, all right. Well, it looks like doesn't look like we've got any more questions. So why don't we wrap up? Ivan, thanks so much for your time. It was a pleasure to have you as always. And I want to thank everybody for attending. And we will send you the link to the recorded session. And once again, if you have any questions for Ivan that you didn't think of today, but tomorrow or later today came to mind, feel free to send him an email directly. All
Please,
right?
I'd be happy
a lot,
to
everybody.
answer them. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.